What's going on, guys? We are live at Teague Custom Marine. Teague Talk with the Swoops. Bob Teague and Summer Richardson are going to be going over forced induction tonight. So fun little topic. I'm sure everyone will chime in and ask your questions as we get through and check it out. Just getting everyone on board here before we start.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Emma. How you doing?
Emma!
I'm from Lake Powell Challenge. Yeah.
And we're going to have
Only Emma I know.
AJ's watching. How you doing, AJ?
and
Yes, they did.
Summer Richardson, aka Mrs. Swoop, who are going to be leading our discussion. Tonight's topic is forced
Again, we're at
induction.
Teague Custom Marine.
That's a little general, but we know it's a broad topic, so we might end up having a few parts to this one. And thanks for joining us again. We're happy to be back. First Teague Talk of the new year. AJ Dove, we got Sargis on board, Eric from Kansas, Doug in NorCal. Thanks everyone for tuning in. So we'll just give you a little preview of our setup tonight. Hey guys.
Check it out.
Sherilyn does such a better job than I do announcing.
Well, you know, just got to kick it off here. First one of 2019.
Yes, first Teague Talk with the Swoops in 2019.
Episode.
Yeah, that's right.
If you guys ever get a chance to swing by Teague Custom Marine in Valencia, California, it is like Candyland for grown-ups. I mean, check it out. It's pretty amazing. Awesome showroom. Tons of big boy toy stuff. Come grab your Teague shirts. But again, tonight the topic is forced induction, superchargers. So it should be a fun one. Bob's going to go through kind of the basics of them, how they work, and then get into a little complex stuff. And, we're probably going to have to do a part 2 to it because it can go pretty in depth with it all. So, but we're getting ready to start here in a few.
I think everyone features CMI headers. So,
Mr. River Whip, how you doing tonight?
and then our other got Mr. Swoop on the cam.
How's it going, guys?
So we're live on Swoop, Instagram, and Teague Facebook. And let's see, what time are we at right now? Well, we still have a few minutes till 6:30 on the dot. We're actually early this time.
I know.
Gathering people.
Yes, we're
Gathering people up. So,
See? Oh yeah, little product placement. We do have
Like that.
Yes. We do have these in stock now if you want your little tumbler cup,
Yeah.
Like it.
you know. Hey
And the funny
Jeremy.
thing is, this has been hot for 4 hours.
There you go.
Yeah, it's not bad.
It's hot tea.
We even have Raymond from CMI is watching. Notice all your headers? Check out this one. You might think it looks like it's on backwards, but no.
It is.
Well, depending on your perspective. It's for a bead, right? Okay.
okay, do we want to get started?
So, hey Kevin. Okay, let's kick it off. You guys tell us the topic tonight.
Hey everyone, we're back with Teague Talk with the Swoops, Mrs. Swoop and Mr. Bob Teague. And tonight we're talking about forced induction. So if you got questions about your WHIPPLES, about your superchargers, about naturally aspirated versus some of these other applications, Bob Teague's the man tonight. And there's a lot of things to look at here. So I'm happy to take it away, Bob. There's a lot of things. I don't know where you want to start.
There's first of all, there's a naturally aspirated, which means the atmospheric pressure is what fills the engine when there's a vacuum created by the piston displacement. If you look over to the left, there is one of the race boat motors out of our Supercat, and that's a perfect example of an 800 horsepower naturally aspirated motor. Obviously, you can see it has no supercharger or anything like that on it. That's a spec motor. A lot of people are going to ask about turbocharging versus centrifugal superchargers and all that. And We have built turbocharged motors for a long time. In fact, we were building almost exclusively turbocharged motors up through mid-80s. And as the gas kind of went another way and not as good, and people were looking for a little more seat of the pants horsepower, we kind of started building roost blower motors. But we still do them, but we feel like that Mercury's pretty much got the turbocharger thing dialed in, and if people want that, it's probably where they should be. There's a couple other good guys with the turbo stuff, like Carson Brummett, and but we are focused more on the screw compressor stuff. But we'll go over the different things. And of course, right here, this is an exhaust housing for a turbocharger, and this is the turbine wheel, and inside here is a compressor wheel. And basically, the exhaust comes out of a manifold, turns the turbine wheel, and which turns the compressor wheel and pressurizes an intercooler, which then pressurizes the motor. This is not a wastegated setup, but there's also the way you have a wastegate is it bypasses pressure from the exhaust side to the exhaust outlet, so that it reduces the amount of pressure going into the exhaust turbine. So unless anybody has any specific questions about turbocharging, which we can talk about, we're going to kind of evolve into different things with unnaturally aspirated engines.
Justin, one of our regulars, thank you. He said, do you work on turbo motors?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We're actually certified on the Mercury Quad 4s, 1350s, 1100s, and all that stuff. We're a Platinum Mercury service center, and we also rebuild all sorts of other turbo motors, typically more in the ski racing boats and stuff like that. But our new production is all screw compressor. And we've evolved to that because it, for example, in prior to 2003, we had one of our base motors was an 800 carbureted blower motor, 509 cubic inches, 1071 blower, a pair of 750s on it, right about 810 horsepower, something like that. That base motor is what we evolved into our first production EFI motor, and then of course that entire program has grown from then, and now actually carb certified through the entire range. But this is a 1071 Mooneyham blower, and this would be the same blower that would have been on like a Mercury 900 or 1000. And the reason I selected this blower tonight is because it's Mooneyhams don't have a pie shape opening in the bottom like some blowers do, so you don't get to see the rotors on the underside. But as you can see here, there's a Teflon strip in 3 places, so the rotors are actually making contact. Now, in case there's any confusion, the blower turns this way. Okay, so it's actually trapping air in a case between the case and the rotor going around. It's not like sucking it down the middle because there's no way to do it. So the blower turns this way, and this, as you can see, there's a twist in the rotors. That's called helix. And as the helix actually pushes the charge towards the front of the blower. So some of the more sophisticated blowers that are in the root style have a pie shape opening right here to keep the rotors sealed all the way to the opening, and so all of the charge comes out of this pie shaped opening in the front. Now there's a term 671, 871, 1071, 1471, all that. Okay, so a supercharger like this, or a roots blower, whatever you want to call it, originated on a Detroit diesel. Because a Detroit diesel is a 2-stroke diesel, and it will not run without a supercharger because because it doesn't have intake valves. So the supercharger force feeds the motor, So a 671 was on a 6-cylinder
How funny.
Detroit diesel, and an 871 was on
Never
an
knew that.
right, and so on. So there was 871s, but then based off of the length, it's the length of the rotor in the case. Okay, so if you take a 6, and a 6 is about this big, and an 8's about this big, and a 10's about this big, and a 14's about this big. So basically, that's where that whole thing came from. 671 means 6-cylinder, 71 cubic inches per cylinder.
Wow.
Never knew that one.
Okay,
Yeah.
so everybody goes, yeah, I got 1471. Well, there's no such thing as a 14-cylinder Detroit diesel, but the size came from throwing.
that.
There's actually some 1671s out there and everything else. So
Wow.
but they all use what's known as this standard blower base pattern, this bolt pattern. So there's a lot of manifolds that fit this pattern, and they're not the same. There's a wider span here than there is here, so you can't put them on backwards on the manifold or anything like that. But the original thing from a roots blower is a Detroit diesel. That's how it all started. And then some hot rodder said, let's put one of these on a gas motor. so that's really how it happened.
You evolved from there.
Right, and it evolved from there. The thing is about roots blowers, and especially in our environment where we run our engines at upper RPM for extended periods of time, and don't tell me you guys only drive 35 miles an hour all the time. They get hot, and the hotter they get, the less efficient they are. And the more heat they make, the hotter the charge is going into the intake manifold and into the motor, and then the less power you make. And so the blower starts to heat soak. And the reason is because it's got drag, first of all. And let's say 1,000 horsepower 1471 blown motor, running maybe 10 pounds of boost, probably takes about 100 horsepower to run the blower.
Yeah.
So
takes horsepower, right? To make horsepower.
Yeah, it takes horsepower to make horsepower. So the whole idea is to figure out a way to have more efficient charge and cooler charge. Now, obviously, we have come up with intercoolers, and Teague Custom Marine actually manufactures the super chillers, and we make them for everything from the old 174 B&Ms up to 1471s, 1671s, and we actually have them in 2 different core options based off of what your blower is. Now, the one that's sitting right here, this is actually for a blower shop 250, and so.
Is your chiller, okay?
Yeah, and this is a super chiller, and this is actually made for the blower shop 250. We make that for them, and then we have the larger ones. Let's grab one real quick.
Need help?
This is the one that's used on a 1471. Okay. Now the whole idea is this is nothing more than a radiator.
This over.
The water comes in low, fills the core up, comes out high, and generally speaking, you can do it 2 ways. You could pump the intercooler all the time with a pump, or you can just drag a pickup with a sea strainer and underway it cools down. So the charge from the blower goes through here, goes in the intake manifold after it's cooled. Typically speaking, on a 1,000 horsepower motor, with or without the intercooler, it's about 100 free horsepower.
Yep.
Because it's cools the charge back down. And originally, we made it with a 16-fin core. And originally, they didn't have this air dam on the side of it. This air dam makes sure that it's sealed so all the charge goes through the core. So this air dam directs it. If you look real close, this is a 9-row 15 fins per inch. In other words, there's 15 fins per inch. This is designed for above 10 pounds of boost. so it doesn't have too much restriction. But for 90% of the applications now, you guys with pleasure boats, running pump gas, whatever, this is 24 fins per inch. And it's more efficient. And at that horsepower level, going from this core to this core is worth about 30 or 40 horsepower.
It's a big difference.
Yeah, big difference. You know, I mean, if you don't need, the only reason you need this core is if you're going to be running, 12, 14, 15 pounds of boost. Otherwise, up to 10 pounds, we run 24 fins per inch. And how do we figure this out? Trial and error. We just started experimenting and seeing what works, and at that time we're building a lot of roots blown motors until we evolved into building the Whipple screw compressor motors.
Do you sell more of these? Because I see that's what's in here, right?
Yeah, we sell more of the 24 fins per inch.
And then what's the material of this?
Okay, this is an aluminum extrusion. These bars is an aluminum extrusion, and these are billet end caps. See where it says TCM there? Well, that's actually a billet cap. Okay, and then this is an aluminum plate that goes on here. We actually assemble these here, and then they go to a braze operation, and they get totally brazed, and the fins braze in, and then they go to hard anodize. So instead of, so this entire, you can see the end of this tube. This is a proprietary tube. And that's the aluminum extrusion that's sticking through this end plate.
All aluminum, no copper nickel?
No copper nickel. We have had such good luck with them. We have people that maybe don't flush them out. 10 years later, 12 years later, they got one with a leak or something. The nice thing is you don't even have to take the intercooler off the motor to change the core.
How often do you need to change something like that?
You don't ever need to change it if you flush your system correctly.
Do it the right way.
Basically, we sell a reseal kit, which consists of the 2 gaskets that go on the end caps, the O-rings, what seals it right in here. This goes in here like this, and that seals it into this deal. And look at you.
Good little helper.
So that goes in there, and this is this part seals the water. This gasket seals the boost. Okay. So we sell this reseal kit, and basically
that's what this is right here.
Yeah,
right?
this is this block, and we have them with 1/2-inch pipe fittings and 3/4 pipe fittings, both ways. And we sell this kit, comes with bolts, gaskets, and everything. Guy wants to change his core, take one end off, pull the core out, shove another one in, put the end back on, you're done.
Nice.
And you can normally do
it yourself.
You can normally do it with the blower on, in the boat. You don't need to take everything apart, so makes it pretty easy. So the reason we got off into this is because we're talking about keeping the charge cool. So that's why when you've got a blower making a lot of heat, because it is an air compressor, okay, and then you want to cool it back down, which gives you a denser mixture, which makes more horsepower. So then, with that in mind, the one thing we want to get rid of is parasitic drag from the blower.
Okay.
And heat.
Heat's bad.
Heat's bad.
Heat is bad.
Heat melts pistons.
Heat is bad for everything.
Right, heat's bad.
What if you have air restriction? Someone's worried about that. Air restriction.
Well, that's a good point. And I'll talk a little bit about engine compartment cooling.
Okay.
Okay, or engine compartment venting. Okay, a lot of boats are built all foo-foo in the interior and everything, and they forget to put ventilation into the engine compartment. And in order for an engine compartment to be proper, it needs ventilation in and out, because the ambient temperature that the engine's running in has a lot to do with how much power it can make. Now, if you have a situation where the engine can't get air into the engine compartment, it's like sucking through a straw. And that will definitely hurt power. And sometimes it'll mess up the tune, because it basically changes the atmosphere inside the engine compartment.
Interesting.
You know, because it lowers the air pressure. So we evolved into the first, and this is a little more modern version, but the first replacement to the roots blower was this 3.3. We did some 2.3s, but really this 3.3. This is a later version. The original blowers were Lyshome. So a lot of you guys might have Lyshome compressors out there, and actually the Mercury 1075s use a Lyshome 2.3 compressor, the twin. And so this is what the rotors look like inside of a Whipple screw compressor. Okay?
We have this red and blue one down here too.
And what's interesting
Wow,
is
it's a lot smoother.
you have a 3-lobe and a 5-lobe. So the rotors are running 2 different speeds. Okay? In most of the blowers, this is the 5-lobe is the one that's driven by the belt, and the 3-lobe is the slave. But here's the thing. These don't touch. So there's no heat made from friction. If they are touching, something's wrong.
It's so perfect.
Okay?
This model might not be as perfect as inside the real deal, right?
Yeah, and
'Cause that shouldn't touch at all.
we keep this on the front counter for kids to pinch their fingers in. So,
It's true
and so, but you can see here, and this is a smaller one. This has got it's 2 different size gears. See, that basically 3 lobes, 5 lobes. So that's what it
That's
looks
cool.
like when it's running. Oh, actually, I got it upside down, but
Yeah.
it's this way.
Want to flip it?
Okay, so it's basically upside down. It actually is upside down on there. The blower turns so that
It's supposed to go this way. Yeah.
Yes.
the air runs around between the case and the rotors. Okay, so the big difference is these are made to run a lot more RPM. Generally speaking, let's say that you've got a 6,000 RPM motor and you're running your 1071 10% overdrive. So, you know, the blowers run a little faster than the motor. The optimum speed for a 3.3 is 13,000 RPM.
Wow.
So it
Jeez.
runs, you know,
Yeah.
maybe an 8-inch pulley on the bottom and a 4-inch pulley on the top, 2-to-1. And the optimum speed, and that has a lot to do, you pick a supercharger based off your cubic inches and your power. So if you have a big supercharger and a small motor, you're not getting the efficiency out of the supercharger because it's not spinning at the right RPM.
Right.
So this is basically what a 3.3 kit looks like that we use on our 825. It has an intake manifold that looks like this.
Okay.
And we poured them and everything, so they look like that. But the thing that's unique about this, instead of having the blower sitting on top of a 4-inch intercooler, plus maybe some carburetors up there, about that much height, there you are. That's from the top of the block to the top of the blower. And it has an intercooler. Inside, this is a Cooper nickel intercooler that fits inside the manifold.
Oh, nice. Oh, careful with this table. We have a lot of weight on this
And
table.
then the water is fed
Yep.
Oh, God.
in and out.
Yep.
And then this spacer sits here. The blower sits there, and you can see that all right there.
Which that's the nice setup because it allows a lot of room for these things to fit under the hatch. You know,
That's
you
right.
don't have to cut your
Little
hatch
fire.
open.
Yeah.
Now this is called a standard 8-inch intercooler. It's Cooper nickel. Then we have a MOAC, which stands for Mother of All Intercoolers.
Okay.
It was the biggest one at the time.
Mother of all
Okay.
coolers.
It was the biggest one at the time.
Uh-huh.
Okay. This is a MOAC. It has 2 inlets and 2 outlets. Okay. That's a MOAC.
Okay.
Okay, then we have a FOAC.
A FOAC.
Guess what that stands for?
Oh shit. Those are
Father
kinda heavy.
of all intercoolers.
Uh-huh.
Here's a FOAC
That's
right
a
here.
big daddy.
Oh, yeah.
This is a FOAC.
There we go. Which that's about 8 inches tall, 10,
It's about 6.5.
6.5.
And it uses a lot of water.
Yeah.
Now there's another configuration that we call, Richard Lee used to make an intercooler, something like our super chiller, that had a Cooper nickel core. Whipple developed something called a dual Lee. And it has 2 Richard Lee cores in it. And and it's about 4.5 inches tall, and we also use that. The 1477s in our DCBs using the dual Lees. They didn't have room for a FOAC.
Got a question. Is this just preference between the two with the material?
Well, the
Or is
Cooper
there-
nickel
okay.
is superior. Unless on any of them, unless you have a plenum fire. And a plenum fire
Yeah,
is
what's
is
plenum?
normally caused by a misfire,
Okay.
and because in a lot of these applications, the fuel injection is in the throttle body, or it's carbureted, and so while it's running, it's still being fed fuel. And if you have a backfire and you get a fire above the core, it'll hurt the core.
Okay.
It'll damage the core.
Well, is this a either or situation?
Yeah.
Depending on your engine?
Right.
Yes. You're not gonna have a super chiller and.
Well,
No, that's what I was saying.
You're not going to have a
like,
super chiller
That's what I'm wondering.
with this setup. However, we do have quite a few 8.3 carbureted Whipple screw compressors with carburetors on them. In other words, to replace a blower like this. And believe it or not, an 8.3 is about this size. And
Wow.
if you were to take a 1471 off of a 565-inch motor that's making, let's say, 1,050 horsepower, pump gas deal, and just simply put the 8.3 on there, and tune the carburetors and everything, that is almost 200 horsepower. Because the blower is that much more efficient, and it runs cooler, so you can actually run a little more boost too without damaging
We're
it.
getting a lot of questions about boost. So.
Can you explain to the viewers like boost, compression, what you mean by that?
Okay,
Like
well,
break it down.
okay, well, compression. Let's start with base compression. Compression is a ratio.
Okay.
It is a ratio between the volume that's remaining in the chamber between the top of the piston, the chamber, including the gasket and everything, when the piston's at top dead center, compared to what it is at bottom dead center. In other words, you got the swept volume. So you got all these, you got this section plus that section. So it's a comparison between what's left over at the top and what's total at the bottom. That's why it's called a ratio.
Okay.
So that's a static compression ratio. And so on a blower motor, for example, generally speaking, flat tops or inverted domes, because you want to keep the compression down. Naturally aspirated motor, you have a pop-up like this that displaces a lot of the volume of the chamber, which makes it a higher compression engine.
So this is why you lower the compression on superchargers, right?
Yeah, because you're
Versus
letting the blower do
aspirated
the
ones.
work.
Okay.
Okay. So that's base compression. Okay, now we're talking about boost. Okay, boost in essence is residual pressure that's not being used by the motor. Okay, so the more efficient a motor is, the bigger the motor is, the bigger the exhaust is, the bigger the cylinder head flow, everything about it, it has the ability to consume more air. If you get to a point to where your boost just keeps going up and you're not making any power, that's primarily because the engine can't flow any more air. So when you're talking about boost, it's the residual pressure in the intake manifold under the blower. Okay? So obviously, the more boost, the more power normally, and definitely the more torque. Because if the boost comes on earlier, it's going to create more torque. But boost is basically the pressure from the underside of the blower to the top of the intake valves. Does that make sense? Now you can affect the boost by the size of your exhaust and everything else. So let's say that because it backs up all the way to your exhaust tips. So for example, if you have switchable muffler tips and you're going along at 4,000 RPM and your boost gauge is reading like 4, and you switch the tips on, it'll jump to about 6.
Right.
Because the pressure is backing up all the way to the motor, to the blower. So the bigger the motor, the more cylinder head capacity it needs, and also the larger the exhaust primaries and everything that need to be.
Okay. Because some people are asking very specific questions, but it probably depends on the application. You know, Eric is asking how much boost with no cooler, big block. But
Okay, well, first of all, it's fuel dependent. So let's just say 91 and 93, because you know I don't believe that we need to build race gas motors to go pleasure boating with. But 91 to 93 octane. If you have aluminum heads, because aluminum heads dissipate the heat better, you could probably get, and let's say that you got a 7.5 to 8 to 1 compression motor, you're probably safe at that 6 to 7 psi level.
okay.
If you got iron heads, probably 2 pounds lower, because the iron heads don't dissipate the heat as well.
I got a question. Is that what that means when people say like boost PSI? I've heard that term. Okay, so
Pressure.
okay.
Yeah.
When people say-
Pressure per square inch.
Okay.
And then same, so what compression ratio, assuming a pump gas setup?
We kind of stick around 7.9 to 8.3, right in that range, depending on the size of the blower too. So you're either gonna make power with some base compression and a littler blower, or lower compression and a bigger blower. Remember what I said. You want to get the motor to work into the optimum speed of the blower, 13,000 RPM. You can have too much blower. The motor that we showed you with the FOAC on it, those engines have two 3.3 liters, so it's called a 3.3 quad rotor. There's 2 of them. And that's a dual fuel motor. On race gas, it makes 1,650 horsepower. On pump gas, and that one just came off the dyno, that's why the headers are off, because we have to get it ready to go in the boat. And I had to adjust the valve, knock the headers out of the way. But anyway, and it makes right around 1,400 on pump gas. But the base compression is 7.8. And it's got massive exhaust, and 2 of those are going to a 42 fountain.
She's a monster.
Staggered fountain. That actually leads well into some other questions. So different models of the Whipple. So you mentioned the quad rotor. We talked about a 2.3, a 3.3. With larger horsepower engines, what is the difference of a big single Whipple versus a quad rotor setup? Are there acceleration or top end differences?
Yes, there is, and I've learned that by trial and error. And it goes to how much blower do you need? What's your horsepower target? You can actually lose a lot of mid-range torque by having a blower that's too big. for the size of your motor. So we have gone to the 5 liter, which the 5 liter and the 8.3 are basically the same. This 1200 horsepower V-drive motor right here, which actually makes about 1280, that's going in a 24-foot Chiata, and that's why the headers are all backwards.
And then which Whipple is on this one?
And that's a 5 liter.
Okay, because someone also asked the difference between the 5 and the 8.3, and if we prefer one of those or another.
Right. We feel that the 5 liters are more reliable. Now, if you look at that, the bottom pulley is a 90-tooth pulley. So it's running 2 to 1. If you were running an 8.3, you would run closer to 1 to 1, maybe 10% over. Now,
Okay.
let's go back to this model right here. A 5 liter drives the 3 load rotor.
I remember.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The 8.3 drives this one. So that the slave is this one. So that's why the pulley has to be bigger to get the blower to go the speed it wants to go. But because of that, and the inertia in the weight of the rotors and everything, the blower is kinder to itself driving this one as opposed to this one.
Because
in
we
that
went to
side
the
of blower.
8.3, and then we kind of
Right.
came back to
Right,
favoring the 5.
so we've done 8.3s, quite a few, and also 8.3 in the carbureted stuff, but right now, up through 1,450 horsepower, the 5 liter is my blower of choice, and it's also we can drive it with an 8 millimeter belt drive, which is robust and reliable. Originally, they had a 16 rib serpentine style belt, and we discovered that they were actually slipping even when they don't look like they're slipping. So we went to a 8 millimeter stuff. You get a robust snout and a better drive system, and so that's what we're using there. When you want to go above, let's say 1,500 horsepower, that's when you start looking at the quad 3s and the quad 4s. Okay, the quad 3s are what's on that motor right there, and the quad 4s are 2 blowers like this one.
Right.
The difference between a quad 3 and a 3 and a 4, I mean a 3 and a 4, is nothing more than length.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Now there's another blower above this, between this and that, called a 4.5 liter, and it's bigger in diameter also.
So you're talking about the quad, they are side by side. I've seen them before.
Yeah,
Look
that's
at
what that
They're
is.
literally,
Right.
yeah.
That's what that is.
So it looks like 2 cases.
2 blowers.
Right there.
2 blowers, 1 unit.
And so why is it called a quad? 4 rotors.
Because each Whipple has
It's 2 blowers, 4 rotors.
Yep.
Okay.
through technology.
So if you're, to answer your question,
Well, that
if
did
you're a
answer.
510 inch motor, you're looking to make about 850 horsepower or so, maybe close to 900. A 3.3 is ideal. If you're going one step above that, 4 liter. 1,100 horsepower is easy to make with a 4.5. And this is all pump gas stuff. Once you get to the 5 liter on a hydraulic roller, you can go up to 1280, somewhere in there. On a solid roller, you can go to almost 1,500. And then above that, anything above that hydraulic roller 1280 basically goes to a solid roller, because you can get more aggressive with your cam profile and a little more lift, and you can also roll a little more RPM.
So I had a question, as far as like even the pulley systems on these, are they pretty much all cookie cutter to what blow you're getting in size, or is there play obviously in that as well for changing setups?
Pretty
That's a whole
much,
other thing.
well, yeah,
That's
pretty much
a
it's
whole
cookie.
other thing with the pulleys,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, pretty much cookie cutter.
Okay.
Because we have a boost target.
Okay.
Okay, so on each configuration there's a boost target. So on this motor right here, which is the 985, we're boosting them only about 8 pounds because the base compression is 8.9 to 1.
Okay.
Okay, on the 1200s we're boosting them about 12.5 pounds because the compression is 7.9 to 1. Okay, so it has a lot to do with the base compression and the configuration and the size of the heads and everything else.
All the math together.
That actually leads into, so I see your question, Justin Anderson. His boat is here now. It's a 30 sport deck where we're
Yes.
upgrading, rebuilding or upgrading the engine.
Right.
900, correct?
Right.
He asked how much boost his boat would be making with our latest update or program to that engine. So there'd be a target boost for that engine program.
Well, we're doing more to it than a 900.
Okay.
Right. We're actually taking it to the next level.
So
Right.
I don't know if we have that answer.
Sounds like it's in
How
our
much
maps.
boost?
Yeah. It'll make a little more boost, but it can make a lot more power because of the cylinder head configuration and everything else.
Okay, so there's different elements there.
We have different cylinder head designs for almost every one of the motor programs, and we've developed them all now with airflow research and with our own seats and our own chamber designs and everything else. So we have like 5 different cylinder heads we use, but they're all from airflow research here in Valencia.
And another specific question, we have John Parks watching. He's from Canada, the bad skater with Teague 1200s.
Oh yeah.
Hi, John.
I got your gimbal here.
Yes, we have that when you're ready for your stuff. What is the horsepower gain between the, so we started with the different intercoolers. So you have the Whipple low profile, the MOAC, and the FOAC, say on the TCM 1200. Would it be worth upgrading the intercooler for a horsepower gain?
His MOACs are fine. He's got MOACs now.
Okay.
But his engines need to be modernized because they're some of the first 1200s. He knows that.
Yes, he
Yeah.
does. And then there's just a few other specific tech questions. Some of this we might have to come back because soon we are going to wrap, but we'll probably do a part 2 if there's more.
Okay.
So you guys can always leave questions on our feeds or email me. We do monitor this and we keep questions for future videos as well. One more question from Glenn here. So what about higher compression? Can you run any of the Whipples with 11-to-1 compression?
Well, I would say it's not advisable. You know, and of course we have a lot of people that built a naturally aspirated motor and are somewhat dissatisfied with the performance for whatever reason, and the compression's too high, and they want to put a supercharger on it, and you can't just bolt one on. There's a lot of other things you got to do. You know, there's another thing that I actually didn't talk about a little earlier about, you know, all of those you've certainly witnessed, you know, the guys that have carbureted blower motors and they have an idle surge. You know, you hear them, you know, when they surge and an idle and everything else. You know, that is not the case with these fuel-injected Whipples. In fact, it's not even the case with the carbureted Whipples because of the fact that what they do is because if they can actually boost at idle, there's a bypass right here and on all of them that bypasses boost at idle. And it pulls this butterfly open so that the blower has no effect, so it's sitting there running like a naturally aspirated motor. And
doesn't have that hunt.
yeah, that doesn't hunt, and it makes it a lot more manageable around the docks and everything else.
User friendly.
Bob, do you guys have a Whipple kit for the GM small block? We have Zach asking.
There is a couple kits that were developed for the Marine GM small block, and it depends on which one. Obviously, they haven't been that popular, so they haven't developed them through all of the different small block offerings, you know, into the LS stuff and everything else.
Okay.
Now, of course, you know, there's a lot of Whipple stuff that's done for the LS-based engines, you know, the Corvettes and Camaros and everything else. So, but it's not the same for Marine.
Gotcha.
Ryan's asking, can you take the bypass off on the Whipple to make it hunt on the carb version?
Or you could tune it differently.
Well, I tell you, if you want the hunt, just open up your mixer screws a little bit on your carburetors. It'll make it do that. Of course, it'll use more gas.
Yeah. I guess whatever effect.
Basically,
you're
what
going
that is an idle that's slightly rich. And with the roots blower, you have to idle slightly rich so that when you shift, the motor doesn't quit. And so, and those of you who have roots blowers, the carburetors, know that you want to shift it right at that low point so it catches it and you can drive away. But but that's just basically a matter of a mixture, idle mixture setting. You can actually close the mixture screws a little bit and make it not do that, and then probably the first time you shift it, it's going to stop. So that's the whole difference, you know, between the two situations. Of course, you know, the fuel injected motors are they correct for that.
You don't need to do that.
And you know, we're talking about. Somebody asked me a little earlier about boost reference and all this other stuff. Well, that actually refers to two different things. There is a mentality that says that if you're running a carburetor on a blower motor, that you need to have the carburetor see what the intake manifold see, and not necessarily what is underneath the throttle blade. And so they basically modify the carburetor and run hoses up to the metering blocks so that they can actually push the power valves open or close with the boost. But almost exactly the same thing can be achieved by simply putting 10.5 power valves in the throttle bodies, because that makes them open sooner. You know, the thing is, the carburetor is basically remote from what the manifold is really doing. So basically, you want to make the throttle, when you put a 10.5 power valve in it, that means the power valve opens, which basically adds 6 jet sizes. It opens when the vacuum gets to 10.5 inches under the carburetor. That's what that means. So when you talk about different numbers, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5, 10.5 is like the biggest they make, which makes it open at the right time, and that's usually the way we would do it. Now there's another thing on fuel injected motors where the fuel pressure is boost referenced. Okay, it's not only boost reference, but it's vacuum reference. So the fuel pressure regulator itself has a vacuum boost line going to it, and so it raises the fuel pressure under boost and lowers it when it's idle and it's under vacuum, because it changes the pressure on the diaphragm and helps compensate for what the diaphragm spring is seeing.
Okay.
That make sense?
Yep.
That makes sense.
Then, okay, Tyler, this might seem like a silly question, but I've had this thought before. Blower or supercharger, what is better? So is that actually an interchangeable term?
That is definitely an interchangeable term.
Okay.
That would be the same as unnaturally aspirated. Okay. I would say that anything that is a supercharger, I mean, you could call it a Whipple supercharger. It says right here, Whipple supercharger.
Yeah.
Well, and they call it a Whipple charger.
Yeah,
as
so
well.
it says Whipple supercharger. Okay, so.
But you could call it a Whipple blower.
And Whipple blower, Whipple supercharger.
All the same.
You can go to Vortec or Pro Charger. They're all superchargers of some sort.
Right.
Difference with a Pro Charger or a Vortec, something like that. They're belt-driven centrifugal compressors.
Okay.
In other words, they have a gearbox in them that makes basically it's like a turbocharger that's being driven by a belt.
That gave me one other topic. Explain the difference on those too.
Oh, yeah.
Versus, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Yeah, and I guess some size. I mean, Matt Carney, hi Matt, Tennessee. How much height and nose length does the Whipple add to a 502 cubic inch?
Okay, this is actually a good example right here, because you can see now this is a 3V setup. So you got a belt for the alternator, a belt for the raw water pump. We run a 2-stage pump or a 3-stage pump, so we're pumping the intercooler all the time, and you got your power steering. Okay, so from whatever you have right now, here's your dampener right here. The dampener's always in the same place. Okay, so you got roughly 5.5 inches from the front of the dampener to the front of this pulley, which is basically the line of the blower. Now, we have kits for the 525s. If you have a serpentine setup or something like that, like let's say it's a 502 Magnum, it's a little more compact because you don't have 3 belts out front. You got 1 serpentine belt. And
Okay.
we'll have it over here. We'll have one out here. Got plenty in the shop.
Okay.
So we might have to do part 2. To really get into
Yes,
things
and I'm
as
going to
well.
give some shout outs.
Yeah.
Glenn Copeland is watching, Zachary Pierce, Magic's in the house right now. Prestige Marine in Havasu, thanks for
Hey.
watching.
And be sure to email us, either Swoop Motorsports or Teague Custom Marine, and your questions. We do part 2. There's enough. And even if you want to get into twin turbos or any of that kind of stuff as well, not sure, but I know superchargers are pretty.
Right. We're
Yeah,
responding
pretty
to
big.
topics that people are
Yes.
sending to us to talk about, and we've already done drives twice, we've done props twice, and so we got quite a few questions about let's call it unnaturally aspirated engines, and so supercharged, blown, whatever, turbocharged. So that's why we picked up this subject tonight.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, well, we like your feedback. You can always comment on our Facebook, send us a private message,
Yep.
email. We'll be doing more, and we want to do topics that you guys are interested in and want to talk about.
Yes, and Dirty Bird, thanks for tuning in. You've been cracking me up with your comments throughout this. So,
Who dat?
Dirty Bird,
That's the user.
he was commenting on how they like the blower surge, and he's like, yeah, that guy just wants to get chicks going through the channel.
Well, it's getting to be called the rookie surge.
The rookie surge.
Yeah, right.
Hey, we still like that blower
Hey,
surge.
you still like it.
Yeah, you
but,
got it. That's
we
why.
want it.
Yeah, you have it. I don't have it.
That's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah.
So, anyways, yeah, thank you guys for tuning in.
Yeah. Thanks
Yeah,
everyone for
see?
tuning in.
If
Teague
I put
Talk
my
with the
shot in high
Swoops.
Yes, here, camera people.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks,
All right,
guys.
have a good rest of the
Thanks for
week.
tuning in.
We'll see you soon.
How long was that?